So my name is Patrick Reinmoeller. I'm a professor of strategy and innovation. And I have picked this topic because I think it's one of the most important topics to pick right now. So wouldn't I say this? I would, certainly I would. I've prepared a couple of slides, some polls, and I really urge you to keep the chat busy, share what your thoughts, reactions are to whatever is said or others put into the chat. That makes things richer for you and for us as well. Very good. So off we go. Let me just switch on the engine here. So this is what I want to discuss with you: scenario principles, basically telling you what I've learned over decades of experience with scenarios, working with executives and boards on how they could grapple with what the future holds for them. I've entitled this "Getting More Comfortable with Uncertainty," because I think how leaders deal with uncertainty can be a major strength for their organization or a liability. So comfortable means with strength. And I think we need to develop strength facing the uncertainty that we all share in this moment. So this is what I plan to do. First, I want to get to know you more, even more than your location. I want to know why you're here, and then I want to explain a little bit how I see the world of scenario creation developing and how we can do this effectively, and that would be it. I'm going to launch a poll right now that is the first of 4. Each poll has one question only, and you have to, with flash speed, punch in just one number, and that gives us an overview of who you are and who is here. So that's what I intend to do. So let me just launch the first poll. So it's about, what is your industry? What's your industry? So who's here? Are you from agriculture and forestry, extraction and mining, manufacturing, services, financial services? I should have put education as well, but you know. Okay, very, very good. This is great. Yeah, wonderful. Okay, so services is quite strong. Services is quite strong. This is very, very good. So I keep it short. So if you're not fast in responding, we're losing out. That's Dana, thank you for clarifying this. I could have asked whether you are in one location or a multinational. I chose not to do that. I wanted to know in which industry you are, and you have a clear picture. Manufacturing and services stand out. Okay, so let me share the results. You see them, and now I'm going to take this off, and I'm going to launch the second poll. So we know that we are mostly from manufacturing and services. Now I would like to see how familiar you are with scenario technique or scenario analysis. So how familiar are you with using scenarios? So never used it, occasionally use it, frequently use it, continuously use it. Occasionally use it seems to be a front runner here. Yes. But there's a frequent usage, used it as well. Yes. Okay. So widespread. Let me just end the poll so that we can move on. And here you see what's going on, and you are equally distributed almost, and the occasional use of scenarios is, I think, a very common reflection of the reality of that practice, and that explains to some degree why we still have some challenges with this. I'll come to this right after the next poll. I want to know more about you, and you want to know more about each other. So when you hear scenarios, what does it mean? Let me just try to stop sharing. Okay, here's the next poll. Just check. Stop sharing. Okay, now the launch of the next poll is done. So the questions are very simple again. Are these stories? Are these trends? Is this about forecasting? Is this about prediction? Is this about prescription? Thank you, by the way, for everyone who is sharing their industry at this point in the chat. That's very helpful. So we have people also from healthcare and other places. Now let's look at what you mean, what you understand when you hear scenarios. It can be more than one, yes, yes, yes. So it could be more than one, but I didn't allow for that. So I forced you to make a decision. So most of the time when you are dealing, when you're hearing scenarios, what do you associate with this? Okay, so I stopped this poll as well. We have already a clear idea about you seeing this more as forecasting and predictions, which is very interesting, and I try to help you out of that. I'll come back to that right after the last poll. I want to know, and you want to know from each other, how involved you were with scenario creation. So how involved were you with scenario creation? Did you ask as the leader in an organization or in a company to have scenarios made? Or did you make them yourselves? Or do you use scenarios of others? Or do you use them to explore and not necessarily to make decisions? Do you use scenarios to execute, for example, a strategic plan? So the results are coming in quickly. This is good. This is very, very good. Use scenarios in making decisions seems to be very, very popular, right followed by made scenarios and used to explore. This is very, very good. Let me stop here and move on. I think this is really helpful to give me and yourselves a flavor of the level of expertise that is in the room, the level of experience and backgrounds that you have. And I'll come back to many of these points that you've just voted on, and will refer to this and provide a little bit more insight into some of those things, like why do I think that scenario is maybe a little bit less about forecasting and prediction than you think, for example. But let's move on. Why do we do this? Why are we here? And we are here to explore something that is very well known. Scenarios. It's an old tool. It's a classic. Why spend time on it? Well, I think we spent time together on this because there's this rich history of the ancients trying it out. Rand Corporation, Shell, Montfleur scenarios in South Africa, and so on, that have shown over and over again that this is a very, very useful tool, a very, very useful approach to thinking. And in times of great uncertainty, the times that we live in, obviously, it's in high demand. It's the best of all times for those who engage in scenario development. So we get pretty busy with this. Exploding demand for scenarios. And yes, the world needs it. There's more uncertainty. People want to be comfortable with uncertainty. So they look for what makes most sense in that context. And this is scenarios. Scenarios have had a massive success. They're widely diffused. If you search on Google, you find 2 billion hits. If you search on Amazon, you find 20,000 books on scenarios. So this is quite a diffusion. And that leads, of course, to confusion. Just in these days, we have quite a lot of things that are peddled as scenarios, but which are of much more dubious quality. So we might see statements that come across the lips of politicians, business leaders, and societal leaders very, very easily. And we hear a lot about things that we don't want to see. So these scary scenarios. So there's a lot of confusion out there. People get more fearful than they ought to be, and more enthusiastic than makes sense. So this is a confusing time. So it's the worst of all times. Just this week, there is a plethora of new content on different versions of what people understand to be scenarios. McKinsey does 10 shifts, Gartner does 19 disruptions. There's a tsunami of utopias and dystopias, and ESG is banking fully on the negative effect and how to prevent corporate results from negative effects of environmental, social, and governance disasters. So there is even greater uncertainty caused by the imperfect use of scenarios. So we are uncertain about the future, and on top of this, we are uncertain about how to think. This altogether makes us realize that we really don't know scenario and scenario creation and its usage so well. What we know is that thinking is really important. Thinking things through is really, really important. But what makes thinking even more powerful is thinking together. And scenario analysis allows us to think together about what might come to pass. And that is where its power lies. So, and just to give you a couple of examples of the confusing reality out there. So we do have probabilities, where people see scenarios as probabilities, and they focus on figuring out by when technology will have caught up with human-level artificial intelligence or human-level intelligence. So when will AI be as smart as humans? And they seem to be converging in their estimates around the mid-half of the century. And we see approaches where scenarios are used to analyze the impact of something on a specific target area. Here, in the case of the Royal Society of Arts, they looked at how technology is going to impact the labor market. So a very specific analysis of one technology. And then we have narratives. Bogdan mentioned earlier something in the chat about narratives, that they are very important. Stories, narratives, and you see that narratives dominate very much the popular press, and there are quite a number. Let's try to organize this. Let's try to get a little bit more clarity so that we can successfully think together. So the realm of probabilities, whenever we can say it's 70% likely or 30% likely, is something that gives us great comfort, because we feel more in control. I'm not going to say much about this, but we always need to ask, what are the assumptions on which people base their probability assessments? And very often, if you poke long enough, often you don't even have to poke very long, you will find that these assumptions are not always withstanding scrutiny. So that is, however, not the area, as you can see, not the area that I want to focus on, that I want to think together with you about. Prepare for what you expect is nice if you have probabilities, sound probabilities. Then you can prepare for what is expected. But very, very often we deal with things that are much more uncertain. And that is the larger space left on this chart. And that's where we have a range of possibilities, a range of possible futures. And then there is in the upper right an area where things are so uncertain we can't even think about possibilities clearly. So let's park this for a moment. I'm just only saying that in that space, we need to develop capabilities that allow us to embrace what happens in the moment. So some of you may be familiar with the improvisation mantra, yes and. That is one thing that we can say about that space. But the scenario space is actually the center space where we can think together about what possibilities are there. And when we do this, then we can prepare without bias. We don't overemphasize one over another possibility. If we explore possibilities without picking one, then we can prepare without bias. It's maybe an exaggeration. I should have said with less bias. Good. So how can we do that? How can we do that? When I asked you, what do you think about the crisis? I bet you're all thinking about different crises. For some of you, it may be the crisis next door, a war unfolding in Ukraine. Others may think about the banking crisis. Others may think about the AI crisis and what it means for jobs. Just now, DeepMind's co-founder has in the press suggested that many jobs will be on the line. So what crisis we are talking about is very much different from a couple of years ago when there were less things to talk about, less things to be worried about. We didn't have the age of polycrisis. Now we have multiple crises unfolding at the same time. That is an extreme situation, and it's probably here to stay. So on the other hand, some of these crises, I haven't even mentioned global warming, will entertain us for the worse, I'm afraid, for quite a long time. So permanent crises have not been around so much. Recently, researchers and scholars have highlighted that we face this situation where we have multiple crises, and some of those are extending their relevance for us over time. So what does that mean for our thinking together about scenarios? It means that in the simplest solution, in the simplest situation, we have one crisis to worry about, and then it will end and we will get over this. So for some, that may be close to COVID, but actually, if you think about it, the virus is still out there, it's still lethal, and it's just that we have found some ways to address it. But viruses are still there. Polycrises are situations where multiple crises occur, and we need to deal with them. So there may be AI, but there may be also global warming. So how do we do with this? This is more difficult than just being able to focus on one thing and get done with this. It's more challenging, of course. At the horizontal end, we have crises that linger on, that continue for a while. And whenever something lingers on and continues for a while, very often, people, populations, leaders lose interest. And that makes it very hard to address these crises successfully over time. So mustering up commitment to address crisis over time is much more difficult than in a moment where a burning platform makes for everyone clear that something needs to be done. So I think the main area that we need to focus on today is where we have multiple crises that are going on forever. So this equal sign is actually is super challenging, but it's actually a simplification of what is really happening out there. The multiplication sign is a much more clear illustration of what is going on. We have multiple crises that linger on and influence each other. And I think that is something that we can use scenarios for to understand, comprehend, and then deal with better than many other tools that are out there. So with this, I want to move on to talk a little bit more with you about what scenarios are, and I show you a couple of examples, and I'm very happy to hear from you what you think about them. I'm checking also the chat, so I saw that the book recommendation was a question. I'll put up something later on so that you can go into more detail. And yes, we need to debias scenario planning with diversity. Bogdan, very good point. I'll come to that in a bit. So what is this? It's about possible futures. Absolutely, we're on the same page, right? It's about future settings. But when we do scenario analysis and work with our clients on scenarios, there are also other ways that I'm not going to go into so much today, but other ways that are also fruitful areas of application of scenarios. And one is the analysis of things unfolding. So bringing the process perspective into scenario analysis to understand where things are going. And then for strategy execution, scenarios can be very helpful in the classical way that Herman Kahn used scenarios for the first time, picking up the term from Hollywood. It's script writing, scenario writing for the movies or for novels or for podcasts for that matter. So again, I'm focusing with you today on the future settings so that we can delve into this most important area of scenarios together. So I've said it, there are many worst case scenarios out there on AI. You will see that the whole story today is a little bit AI heavy because it's one of the dominating themes that keeps us all occupied. But these are the worst case scenarios, and interestingly, these are not the ones where robots turn into Terminators and kill us all. These are the more mundane things that do more or less the same. And these are out there, a plethora here. It's IEEE, reputed institution in the engineering space. And it's not that they're wrong or that it is bad to think in terms of worst case scenarios, but if we only do that, that's not so good. The same can be said for the best case scenario. So the World Economic Forum put out something, the 6 positive AI visions. Again, the overlap between what people see scenarios could be or should be. And you see that the estimates when what is accomplished starting from the year 2016 varies a bit. Some of the things, right, New York Times bestsellers, maybe closer at hand than we expected at the time. But you see that there is clearly also a huge space of possibilities for positive AI visions. And so like the worst case focus, a best case focus is not really helpful. Yeah, pessimist, optimist, that's all fine. What scenario allows us to do is to think together and see how we can comprehend the future so that we can address it successfully. So one scenario set has been here developed by Steinbeis, and I think that's kind of by Ertel Vorsteinbeis. I think it's quite interesting to see these different ways of how AI computers in this graph is going to be smarter than humans or not smarter as humans. So what I want you to do in the chat is I want you to give me a number. I want you to give me the number that you think is most relevant. So number one is the computers will never make it. Humans, they just have an edge and they're keeping it. Number two is computers will, in a short period of time, more or less, will surpass humans. And the third one is, well, together with smarter computers, humans will keep their edge. And then four, we'll have a singularity where computers just lift off. And then we have five, where computers over time become smarter than humans, but then also they'll hit the law of diminishing returns. And six, the combination, both will work more and more together with diminishing returns, but still increasing intelligence. So this is very, very interesting just to see what the poll says. We have a broad spread. We have a broad spread here and some very interesting ideas. Bruno says, made by humans will become a premium brand. I think it actually is already in the luxury space, Absolutely. Andrew is for one with François Xavier. This is interesting. Blequa is number two, and we have three, Olivier. We have a white, Pedro is four. We have almost everything here, 5, 6. This is very, very interesting. So you are interested in the futures, and these are the possibilities, and the wide spread of the possibilities that you see and cannot easily agree upon is just the point that scenarios makes. We don't know what is going to happen in the future. We cannot know it. Nobody knows it. No one has come from their back to tell us how it is. So it's impossible to forecast the future with any accuracy. That's why I'm a bit hesitant when it comes to see scenarios as forecasting or prediction tools. So let's move on and see what the Atlantic has for us. So I find this quite an engaging visualization. Will AI ... us. So this is a very playful way of thinking with words what is possible and asking what if questions. And I think that's quite a smart way of doing this. Obviously, it's not going to convince the skeptics in a boardroom. So what very often is used is the following. We look at scenarios coming from, trends from different areas like politics, technology, the social environment, economics, and also the environment, the natural environment, and develop plausible and possible futures. And that is difficult when you have a massive trend like AI, and even the luminaries of this planet, the late Stephen Hawking, couldn't agree with Ray Kurzweil. So Stephen Hawking was warning us of the grave danger that AI represents. And Ray Kurzweil can't get there fast enough. So you see that Elon Musk is somewhere in the middle, like Steve Wozniak and Demis Hassabis. Sam Altman also somewhere in the middle, which is quite interesting, given that he is one of the co-founders of OpenAI. So we have one trend, and it's not clear whether it is positive or negative. And that is where possibilities open up. And that's where we start our analysis. This is Sequoia looking into when things might be possible and they look into how AI, how technology makes things achievable. So in 2030, final drafts will be better than those of professional writers, and video games and movies will be personalized dreams. So this is how they develop richness over time, segmented based on what the prediction is about. The prediction in the first row is about the text quality, then at the bottom, the video quality or gaming quality. And I find that quite useful, quite interesting, but it is not rich enough for my taste. What I find richer is something that very often starts with a simplistic four-box matrix, or the idea to develop four scenarios based on 2 dimensions. I'm going to share with you a scenario analysis that the Dutch Ministry of Defense developed. So it's known as the verkenningen in the Netherlands. And I think it's quite a neat way of analyzing how the future world looks like, and how the Dutch government needs to think about its investments into the defense of the country. And what they did is they took 2 dimensions, and let me just, this is not a Dutch course, so let me just highlight for you. This means non-cooperative. This means cooperative. So they choose 2 dimensions, and one dimension is the degree to which the actors around the world will cooperate with each other. Will they be cooperative or not cooperative? It's pretty simple. And then they choose who are these actors actually? Are these states, or are these very different, diverse set of actors? Non-governmental institutions, supranational institutions, global institutions, are these companies, organizations? So that's the second axis. Who does what in a more or less cooperative way? Who does what? And I think the results are quite fascinating. Let me just try to get this off. Just I need to get out of this for a second, otherwise it stopped reacting. Okay, so let's go right back into this, and it should be gone. Okay, very good. Perfect. So, and when we have these 2 dimensions, who does what, we see 4 different worlds emerging. And one world is multilateral, that's the top right corner. And another world is where fragmentation describes how states and non-state actors deal with each other best. And then we may have a network where different actors form networks, associations, alliances. And the multipolar world is where on the top left hand, where we see different clubs forming, and we see less interaction, less cooperation between those rather than within these clubs. So this is a way of thinking about 4 different plausible and possible futures. And they've done this a while ago. So it's quite interesting to see how well this captures the situations today. 4 plausible possible futures that ask the Dutch government the question, so now how do we defend ourselves best? Where do we put our chips? Where do we invest? And this is the logic that drives decision making. And I find that a very, very useful way. So ultimately, what it all boils down to is coming to these questions. So which are the opportunities that arise from the scenarios, and what are the threats, and how do we deal with both of them in order to make our organizations thrive in the future? So that's where we are in agreement, right? So let's go. And let me show you another one. This is about AI. So this was developed by executives in one of our sessions. AI can be helpful, or it can be become a prison guard. It can be wonderful to age and enjoy life beyond 100 years old, going on cruises, having tours, socializing. It can be wonderful if AI helps us leading these lives, but it could also be terrible because AI could just prolong an aching subsistence. So if that's the case, then we see that there are four very, very different ways of thinking about the future that emerges. And again, we ask the same questions. How does our healthcare provider, or how does our pharmaceutical company, or how does our governmental agency deal with the threats and opportunities that arise from each of them? And when you ask this question, then, of course, for the decision makers, they need to know whether they want to survive under all circumstances or make a big bet on one or the other scenario. And that's where the risk profile of the decision makers comes into play. Good. So what are the types that we frequently encounter when we work with companies developing scenarios? So there are widely exploratory scenarios, and some in the poll said that you are using scenarios to explore, to figure out what might happen and be inspired by it, or take some hints from this. So explore sequences of emerging events or visions of distant futures. And the consequences of these developments or these futures for you, if you were encounter them, are what makes them really valuable. There are also anticipatory scenarios where some know this as future backward thinking, where you project a desired specific end state far out in the future, and then you think step by step what needs to be done to get there. So because this approach involves a desired future end state, it is also called prescriptive or normative. And both work well, both work in a combination extremely well. And then, of course, there's the methodological question. How do we develop those? For my taste, for my experience, I can tell you that all scenarios are based on data. They have to be based on data. If they are not based on data, they are not believable, and no decision maker will take any significant decision based on pure imagination. So they are all based on data. The question here is this a purely quantitative scenario where assessment models and data availability play an important role? But ultimately, I think they are great to back up qualitative data analysis and visualization, which would then be the top right corner. Qualitative scenarios describe in a non-numerical way what the future might look like. So they go beyond the Excel sheet, beyond full Excel sheets towards rich scenarios. That's, I think, the idea. Narratives are very, very important there. It needs to be plausible and possible. And very often this is applied, the only way doing something like this, because other models are not yet available. So let me pause here for a second. How many of you know this, or what is this logo? Which company's logo is this? Okay. You're my crowd. This is very, very good. So you got it. Spot on. So recently I asked the same question, a group of executives, and a minority only could identify this. No, there's executives are busy, you are busy, everyone's busy, but this may be the biggest thing happening right now. So OpenAI has released last autumn the first chatbot that wowed the populations around the world's countries. So 100 million in no time. And this is quite an astonishing thing. So we have heard a lot about this, and I don't want to go into detail. For this, we would have to have more time. But what I did is, just for fun, I asked it to help us. You know that AI, this kind of AI, does just one thing. It's predictive analytics, and it predicts the next word that fits best to the words that have already been out there. So this is interesting, and it is generating fiction. It is generating stories, sometimes even hallucinations that have no grounding in reality. But this is what it could do for us. And I asked, give me 4 scenarios that show how rapid development of AI intersect with the deterioration of environmental conditions. And what do you think? It's yes, absolutely. It does not know how to do simple math. Yes, it cannot ride a bicycle. Yes, and it cannot play chess. Yes, so absolutely right. So there's much enthusiasm about it, about its ability to predict what the next word in a sentence might be, and it does that very well. I mean, look, this is amazing. This is fantastic, but there are limitations. Now, I asked it, and that's the response. I asked it, hey, can you be short? I'm giving a webinar. No, I didn't say this, but I said within 33 words, just to spice it up a little bit. And I wanted to have some evocative titles. So, it responded, yeah, great, I can do this for you. They'll capture the range of plausible futures resulting from the interplay between the rapid development of AI and the deterioration of environmental conditions. They highlight different outcomes and dynamics that could shape our world based on these dimensions. So that sounds great. Here are the scenarios. Esther, it's an excellent tool. I give you a quick look at this. You can see this in the replay if you like. So tech utopia, the tsunami of topias, we had that already. A tech-driven divide, so there are some who will make it, and the gap between those who make it and those who don't will become even larger. And it is predicting or suggesting that this scenario is associated with social unrest. Nature's resilience is an interesting one. And then dystopian domination, again, utopia, dystopia. I find that quite impressive. No, what do you think? Sergey says the vocabulary is important. Yes, there is something, a new science developing, I'm exaggerating, a new art developing, it's prompt engineering. Yeah, Mirna, I also think this is impressive. This is really impressive. And the question is, are these good scenarios that executives should take into account when they make difficult decisions that are hard to return? What are the data behind? Excellent, Valentina, wonderful question. The data behind is everything that it could grab on the web. So very, very good. Everything that it could grab on the web. And it is basically data that just fits together because it looks as if it were to follow something else. So it is, again, constructing these scenarios based on the preceding words. It's one word after another. And in that sense, it doesn't know what it's talking about, but the sentences make sense and are grammatically correct as far as I can say. So let's move on a little bit and see the shadow of possibilism. So AI produces plausible sentences. The chatbots from OpenAI produce plausible sentences. They make up sentences that we read and think, yeah, that could make sense. So going for that, and there is a branch in scenario thinking that engages in using fiction writers to envision plausible futures. So it's very experimental there. This kind of possibilism is, I think, great because it pushes the boundary, it challenges us and executives. That's fantastic, but it has a shadow side. And one, of course, is hallucinations. Sometimes facts are just made up. ChatGPT is not the only one that is making up facts sometimes. Sometimes people become members of parliaments after making things up. So there is some mindlessness to this. So whenever you don't like the scenarios that you put into ChatGPT, you can generate another one and another one. And all the visuals and all the verbal output of these chatbots or AI-powered machines vary depending on who puts it in, how it is put in, and there is a lot of randomness to it. So it's not necessarily a mindfully usable tool if one is not careful. If you're careful, it's great. There is an avalanche of scenarios coming, so I bet that you are going to try and, if you have not done so, you try and do it yourselves. Here's the main shadow that I see. So I've been practicing a lot on this kind of engagement with this technology. And I've come to realize that the time it takes to write something is becoming shorter and shorter. But the time it takes to edit something becomes more arduous with this kind of technology, because if you release a text as if it was yours, you need to make sure that it is not containing hallucinations, that it is really making sense, and it is helping the executives that have asked you to develop scenarios. So the time investment does not come for the writing, but it comes through the editing process. And the simple analogy, I know that some of you may like The Economist a lot, and I certainly share this. But however, the story here is, how does The Economist get the quality of the writing so good? It invests a lot in editing. So the journalists were responsible for the facts and write the stories, but then there's a lot of editing involved. And the quality of your scenarios that you're going to generate henceforth with AI will depend on the wisdom that you pour into what the output of AI is. Good. So how are we going to do this? I think we should try, first of all, to avoid the pitfalls. So just because we have 4 images that portray the future, we should not think that we have captured all possibilities. So very often it is a highly iterative, continuous process that explores numerous scenarios. For purpose of communication and visualization, very often companies show 4, 3, 2 scenarios. Otherwise, it becomes too complex. So we should not be complacent, and we should not continue doing only scenarios forever, because then we are paralyzed, take never action, because we are investing everything into analysis. We need to, prior to having the scenarios, decide what we are going to do with them, so that we are not avoiding making the decision that needs to be taken after we found a scenario that we don't like. And we need to make sure that we know what our risk profile is. Do we want to make sure that our family-owned business survives also the handover to the 5th generation or the 50th generation? Or are we okay with taking some bets and are going about investments in a bit of a rogue way? So these are pitfalls that I've seen over and over again. some numbers for your exploration with scenarios. So I would suggest that you have a base case. So I think it's good to have a base case. What's the current situation like? It's good to bring everyone on the same page. That's where thinking together starts. I think you should have at least two variables. So in the Dutch case, it was who is involved and how do they work with each other. So two variables. Critical variables, hopefully. Then I think it's useful to have more than two scenarios, more than two, more than three, not more than five though. Why? More than two. If we have two, we very often, I've seen it over and over again, we very often fall into this best case, worst case. And that's basically saying the future is going to be heaven or hell. And that is meaningless. It's not rich enough. If we have 4 or 5 scenarios, we can develop the nuances. And Rand Corporation developed scenarios, 9 scenarios to flesh out what's happening with aerospace and defense. And 9 is a lot to hold in your mind, in anyone's mind. So that's a bit far. And I think it's very important to identify 4 key factors, four critical factors on which the futures depend, so that we can see what we can do about them. So more than 0, more than 2, more than 3, more than 4. How do we do this? I've seen oftentimes that strategy making and scenarios get confused. And that's because the word comes out of a context where the overlap is there. So in the business world, keep it separate. Strategy making is informed, is supported, is helped by scenario making, but it's not the same. A scenario is never a strategy. There need to be diverse and interested people in developing scenarios for your company, for your organizations, but they should be disinterested. What does that mean? In corporate governance, we very often have the problem that we need independent directors. And the same thing here, we need independent people who develop scenarios. If they have a stake in a strategy, they very often turn into the world's foremost experts into developing scenarios that show how fantastic their strategy is. So they need to be interested but disinterested. The sequence and the process is important. So what comes first? Strategy first, scenarios first. I would suggest that you start with the scenarios. The data, the underlying data is critical, and the way the data is presented is critical in that it influences the audience. If you throw an Excel sheet at them, it will have no effect. That's why rich scenarios, narratives grab humans not only at the head, but also at the heart. Don't recycle scenarios. As someone who does scenarios with companies, I would say that. But here's the reason. Scenarios that you find that others have made available are very often advertising and or developed for a very different purpose. Your situation is special, so don't underinvest in that. Finally, we need top management to support the process of strengthening strategy with scenarios, but we don't need supervision. We just had a call with executives, and they wanted to be closely involved with the scenario team when they develop scenarios, because they have a stake in what is found out. And if they're too close, if they're supervising, you're taking away the whole energy, purpose, and effect that scenarios can have on your strategy. So here are my principles for you, and then I'll go back into the chat and open up for more questions. I think we need to open up to possibilities. So probabilities are fine if we have them, but in a world like ours, probabilities, certainty is scarce. So we need to open up to possibilities and just learn how to feel more comfortable with them. And we can do that with scenarios. We use scenarios because they become a platform for thinking together about these possibilities. And that requires an effort. Thinking is hard. Thinking together is exponentially harder, especially in the teams that you need for this. People with a high level of cognitive diversity, which is closely associated with demographic diversity. Then take time seriously. Time is the variable that is underappreciated very, very often. We are often too short-term orientated. I think leaders of organizations need to take time to work on scenarios, on possibilities, and they need to take time seriously. As time progresses, things change, the scenarios change, and their impact, the impact that they can herald for your strategies might change as well. All right, so I have only 3 minutes left. I have to apologize. I leave you with one question, and then we go into the chat. What will you do? So write just one word into the chat, and what will you do going forward with the scenarios? And one thing that I hope you do is I hope that you stay in touch. So let me just go back to all these wonderful comments that came in. The issue is the sources, absolutely. So what is the data behind? That's very opaque. We don't know exactly. And that's an opportunity if you develop AI for your organization, so that you develop your own corpus. That's very, very important. They are generic, Alessandro, very, very much. They're very generic. They are generic. But one thing, let me defend ChatGPT there. I asked it to come up with 33 words. So that's one pressure point. It could have clearly generated 3,000 words. Thanks. Yes. Okay. Very good, EPFL. Very, very good. I'm proud of the colleagues here. If you ask something really complex, you realize that it's just combining words. Absolutely, Paolo. Very, very good. Yes, Sergey, excellent. The evolution is rapid. Absolutely. Why I have been speaking, things have been moving on. So let's all keep an eye on this. This is like the early days of the internet. Every time you log on, the world has changed. And this is really important to keep on track with that. And at IMD, we work closely across all interests, whether it is strategy or leadership or tech, to keep abreast and work with AI as much as possible for our clients. How about all the effort that goes into bias mitigation, that goes into scenario development by humans? Can that be edited out when AI develops scenarios? Dana, bringing in bias is, or having bias when you develop scenarios is a huge problem. So data can help, but there you need to pay attention to what data you're using. Is the data biased? You just perpetuate this. The diversity of the team is essential. So you need to have all stakeholders represented, and also outsiders. represented ideally. So this can be quite extensive, and for some organization they rather source it out, and that's good with us and also others. But I think the capability to develop and work with scenarios, especially powered by AI, needs to somehow be internal. Otherwise, you make yourself dependent on some consultancy or another. Can AI imagine and innovate, make innovations in data, or just combine differently? This is a very interesting question. Because what is creativity? Is it creating something out of nothing, or is it combining things? That question is eternal. And Baijang, thank you very much that you totally agree. I have to say I'm super excited about all the comments that you brought in here. This is absolutely fantastic. I have run out of time, especially out of Swiss time. So we're 1 minute over time. Thank you all very, very much. And please stay in touch. And I hope to see you at a similar occasion very, very soon, here on campus or online. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.